It all began with a dream, a simple, heartfelt vision. I'd spent my entire life working to afford the perfect piece of land where my family could build our forever home. The spot I found was breathtaking, expansive, serene, and just beyond the edge of a tidy, well-kept neighborhood. The tranquility felt like a gift. But I had no idea that this same neighborhood was under the iron grip of a ruthless homeowners association, HOA, lying in wait to claim what was mine. The trouble started innocently enough. One day, as I stood surveying my land, a group of HOA members approached me. They were dressed in business casual, their smiles as artificial as their politeness. Leading them was a woman in her 50s, her hair cropped in a severe bob that looked sharp enough to slice through steel. She introduced herself as Margaret Hensley, the HOA president, her voice dripping with saccharine charm as she welcomed me to the community. At first, the conversation was cordial, until she offhandedly mentioned adjustments to my property lines. Confused, I asked her to clarify. With a flourish, she produced a neatly folded document from her clipboard, a revised map of the neighborhood. My stomach dropped as I studied it. According to this map, a substantial chunk of my land, the exact spot where I'd planned to build my house, had been redesignated as part of the HOA's communal area. I looked from the paper to her, struggling to comprehend. "This has to be a mistake," I said, keeping my tone steady. Her smile stretched wider, but it held no kindness. "Oh, no, dear," she replied. "The previous owner failed to keep proper records, so we corrected the boundaries for the community's benefit. It's all perfectly legal." Legal? That was my land. I had the original deed, the surveys, every document in order. There was no way they could simply declare it theirs. Anger surged within me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I'll need to look into this," I told them. They nodded as if it were a trivial matter and left me standing there, clutching their revised map. That night, I pored over my paperwork. Everything checked out. There was no doubt the land belonged to me. But as I dug deeper into HOA practices online, a grim reality emerged. These organizations often operated like shadowy syndicates, exploiting legal loopholes and technicalities to impose their will. Still, I wasn't about to surrender. This was my property, and no one was going to take it from me. The next morning, I marched into the HOA office, my documents in hand, determined to resolve the misunderstanding. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the chill of hostile territory. The space was stark and sterile, adorned with bland posters about community and order. A receptionist with a practiced smile ushered me into a small conference room where 3 board members, including Margaret, awaited me. I laid my papers on the table. "There's been a mistake," I said firmly. "This land is mine. Here's my deed, my surveyor's reports, everything." Margaret barely glanced at the documents before giving me a condescending look. "I'm afraid that's outdated information," she said. "The community voted on this change months ago." I blinked. "What? I wasn't even part of this community months ago." She nodded with mock sympathy, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "Yes, but the adjustments were necessary for the greater good. You'll still have plenty of space for your home. This area," she tapped the map, indicating my stolen land, "will become a lovely park for everyone." My blood boiled, but I kept my composure. "You can't just take my land." She chuckled softly. "Oh, we didn't take anything. We reassigned it. The neighborhood agreement allows us to make such decisions for the majority's benefit." I clenched my fists beneath the table. "So you redrew my property lines, took a piece of my land, and now you're saying I'm powerless to stop it?" A smug board member named Harold, his hair slick with too much gel, piped up. "You're welcome to pursue legal action, of course. But our legal team is very experienced. It could take years, and there's no guarantee you'd win." Years. They were threatening me with red tape, banking on the system's sluggishness and cost. Fury pulsed through me, but I refused to let them see me rattled. Leaning back in my chair, I studied their smug faces. They were so certain I'd back down, just like everyone else must have. "I appreciate your time," I said coolly, standing up. Margaret beamed. "We're glad to have you in the community." I left that office with one thought blazing in my mind. They had no clue who they were dealing with. If they thought I'd accept this quietly, they were gravely mistaken. That evening, I drove past the contested section of my land. The HOA had already begun marking it off for their community park. My land. They'd violated my rights, disrespected me, and expected me to swallow it. No, I wouldn't just fight back. I'd make them regret ever crossing me. That night, I began plotting. The HOA had miscalculated. They'd assumed I'd play by their rules, that they held all the power. But they'd overlooked a critical detail. They'd claimed my land without securing full legal ownership. It was still mine, and that gave me leverage. A grin spread across my face as a plan took shape. If they wanted my land, they'd pay dearly, in the most absurd, excruciating way possible. I'd build a wall, a towering, unmissable barrier to enclose their precious park. And when they demanded I remove it, I'd hit them with an offer they'd never anticipate. The HOA thought they'd won. They didn't realize the game had only just begun. The next morning, I woke with a fire I hadn't felt in years. They'd made their move, now it was mine. I spent the day making calls, gathering resources, and consulting experts. First, I needed a blueprint. Not just any wall, but a statement. It had to be massive enough to shock them, tall enough to block their park entirely, and legally airtight so they couldn't touch it. Once the design was set, a 20-foot-high fortress, I sought contractors. Most hesitated when I explained my vision, some laughing, thinking it was a prank. But when I showed them my deed and offered hefty pay, they signed on. Within a week, I had a crew ready. Construction day arrived, and the air buzzed with tension. As my workers unloaded materials, curious neighbors peered from windows or strolled by, whispering. It didn't take long for the HOA to notice. Less than an hour after the first concrete blocks were laid, Margaret stormed toward me, her usual fake smile replaced by raw fury, her posse of board members trailing behind. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she shrieked. "Building a wall," I replied, unruffled. She scoffed, throwing her hands up. "You can't just build a wall in the middle of the neighborhood." I raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I can. This is my property, remember? The same land you claimed for your park." Her face flushed crimson. "That land was reassigned for community use." "Reassigned, but not legally transferred," I countered. "You never took ownership. Since it's still mine, I can build whatever I want." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, realizing their mistake. They'd grown so accustomed to bullying people that they'd gotten careless. "You're being unreasonable," Margaret hissed. "Think of the children, the families who wanted this park." I smiled. "I am thinking of them. That's why I'm ensuring no one trespasses on my land." Her fists clenched. "This violates HOA regulations. We have rules about neighborhood aesthetics." "I know your rules," I said, crossing my arms. "And I also know private property owners can build fences if they meet zoning laws. Guess what? My wall does." Her mouth flapped open and shut, speechless. She turned to Harold. "We have to stop this." He adjusted his tie nervously. "He's technically right. The land's still his. We can file complaints, but he's within his rights." Margaret's face contorted with rage, but she knew she'd lost this round. With a final glare, she spun around and stormed off, her entourage scrambling after her. I turned to my crew. "Let's keep going." Over the next few days, construction hummed along. The HOA didn't relent. They sent letters, first asking me to reconsider, then threatening fines. I ignored them. They filed city complaints, but my wall complied with every regulation. Then they tried sabotaging my workers, spreading lies about illegal work and unpaid wages. I'd warned my crew about HOA tactics, so they brushed it off and kept building. By the second week's end, the wall was nearly done, a 20-foot marvel stretching across my stolen land, encasing their park entirely. I added a final flourish, a massive gate with a sign, "Private property, entry fee required." That evening, residents gathered, stunned. Parents who'd planned park playdates stared in disbelief at the fortress. Margaret arrived, livid. "You've gone too far," she screamed. "Have I?" I said calmly. "You took my land. I just ensured you can't use it." "You can't charge people to enter," she bellowed. "Why not? It's my property. If the HOA wants access, they can rent it from me." The board members paled. Harold stammered. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," I replied. "I'll even offer a neighborly discount." For once, they were speechless. They'd never faced real resistance. As I walked away, Margaret's furious sputters echoed behind me. The wall stood, the gate locked. If they wanted their park, they'd pay. The next morning, shouts woke me. A crowd had gathered. HOA members rattled the gate, while confused residents demanded answers. Margaret was mid-rant, blaming me as homeowners turned on her. When she saw me, she jabbed a finger my way. There he is, the man who ruined this community. Ruined, I said, arms crossed. I reclaimed what's mine. You can't charge for a park, she snapped. It's my land, I shot back. You never legally took it. I can do what I want, including charging rent. A father with a young girl frowned at Margaret. Wait, is this true? You said the park was ours. Margaret faltered as murmurs grew. It was supposed to be, she said quickly, but he's exploiting a technicality. A technicality? I laughed. It's called ownership. The crowd's discontent shifted toward the HOA. Harold stepped in. Let's negotiate. We can work something out. Negotiate now? I said. You didn't negotiate when you stole my land. It was a misunderstanding, he mumbled. A misunderstanding you bullied me into accepting, I retorted. Now you want to talk? Cute. Margaret snapped. Take this wall down, or we'll sue. Go ahead, I said. My wall's legal. Waste your money. I'll wait. They huddled, whispering frantically. Harold finally asked, how much? I grinned. Triple what you paid for the reassignment paperwork. Monthly. That's outrageous. Margaret cried. Take it or leave it, I said. She glared, then glanced at the growing, restless crowd. She'd lost their trust. Fine, she spat. We'll pay. But this isn't over. Oh, I know you'll try something, I said. Good luck. She stormed off, defeated. Days later, the HOA began paying, grudgingly. They sent inspectors, pressured my crew, spread rumors, but nothing stuck. Some non-HOA neighbors even paid the fee to use the park, amused by the HOA's downfall. Cracks formed. Margaret faced pressure, board members quit, and residents demanded reform. One evening, a weary board member, Paul, visited me. The HOA was broke. Rent and legal fees had drained them. Homeowners were rebelling. He begged to lower the rent. I shook my head. You signed the deal. Not my problem. They're seeing the truth about us, he pleaded. Too late, I said. Unless you've got an offer. His eyes lit up. What kind? Sell me the HOA, I said. He gaped. You're serious? Dead serious. You're sinking. Cut your losses. A week later, they caved. I own the HOA. At a community meeting, I offered a choice, dissolve it or reform it. After a vote, we kept it, fairly run, no tyranny. Fees dropped, rules relaxed, and the park reopened, free, on my terms. Margaret couldn't take it. She sold her house and fled. Her reign ended. I upgraded my home with HOA funds, a patio, security, a spiteful driveway extension. An old neighbor toasted me. You beat them at their game. I grinned. They should have read the fine print. Months later, I found Margaret at a cafe, a shell of her former self. I sat down. Haven't humiliated you enough? She muttered. You did that yourself, I said. But I've got an offer. I slid her a job proposal, property management under me. She stared, then signed. Why? She asked. Redemption, I said. You were a tyrant, but you can learn. The HOA war ended. She worked quietly, humbled. I'd won, completely, and the neighborhood thrived, free at last.